Welcome to another episode of Bringing Down the Grindhouse, a podcast where we discuss horror in media. And tonight, the Spanish Inquisition, witches, paganism, feminism, all of these things coalesce into one. We're going to discuss that tonight with a special guest.
Ooh.
I'm Mitch.
I'm Mur.
I'm Justine.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Dorian, otherwise known as Danko Suvin from Dank to Luz on Instagram. And of the Benzo Rehab dungeon. You see, Mitch, I'm sorry to hit the ground running, but the most impressive thing to me about you is, in fact, I've been trying to plug this episode on my other events for quite a while, and I can't say the name of anything right ever. So trying to say Bringing Down the Grindhouse, that's the best I've ever done it, and I still stumbled a little bit. I'm a fucking idiot.
It is
I'm
a bit of
dumb
a
person.
tongue twister.
You know, that's what happens when you've been doing this for almost 2 years now. And you have about 100
Over
plus
100,
episodes
yeah.
recorded.
Jeez.
I mean, I've only fumbled 1 or 2 times.
And we edited it out.
Yeah, and that makes sense, though.
There's one I left in because it was funny after we did the redo.
You know, we actually, sorry to have you guys pat me on the back, but I need that. We just hit our 50th episode on Benzo Rehab Dungeon.
Hell yeah.
We did.
Yes.
I will say that it is a very enjoyable podcast to listen to if you are super into like politics and discussing theory and the plight of capitalism upon the average human. So yes, absolutely check out Benzo Rehab Dungeon. It's sick.
We haven't recorded in like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
I know, this feels weird.
Feels
Also,
off.
Because someone
Yo, don't look at me.
wasn't feeling very well.
just everybody,
Someone had a
everybody
dangerous tummy ache.
And then someone had a show to do.
A show.
Some people.
Yeah, we don't talk about that. We're not in a band.
You're
We're not in a band.
Oh, are you saying that you don't use this like one source of attention to fund and feed all of your other projects?
He does not.
You don't like force other things in your life down your listener's throat?
Yeah, we're really not. We're not like the Spanish Inquisition here. Okay. We're
Yeah,
not
so
about that.
check out Doomslayer HQ on Instagram.
I was about to say.
Because
Smooth.
I am not above that. And I would just like to let everyone know that though these things may have passed, because this podcast, unlike my podcast, edits because they care about you.
We make minor
Yes,
edits,
I
all right?
edit every single episode.
So I do not know when this will come out, but if it comes out before August 14th and 15th, go check out Foreign Object with a K, on Instagram, because we are doing a memes and philosophy workshop where we will treat you to a seminar on how to make really shitty memes about philosophy.
That's great.
That
And
sounds
you will
amazing.
love it, and if you don't love it, I can't help you, and there's nothing for me to do. But yeah, Foreign Object with a K on the 14th and 15th of August, 10 a.m. PST, and it's going to suck. I'm just getting all the pitches out of the way at the beginning.
That's how you do it. That's
as
how you usually
irritating as
go.
possible. Now we're going to lose all of the listeners.
They're just going to keep pressing the 15
No,
seconds
if they listen
button.
for a
Yeah,
minute, it still
right?
counts.
Shit, that's what I do. I'm like, when's this fucking commercial
Brought
gonna
to you
end?
by Blue Chew. No.
Oh my god.
But yeah, I will save the rest of the pitches, and there will be more pitches for later.
Yeah, we're gonna cut into the middle of it and just make a fake commercial.
Hey, Justine. That's what I feel like.
Hey, Mur.
Oh my god.
Painful diarrhea.
I do. Thank you.
So motherfucking witches.
Bet I've been looking forward to this conversation.
So it's going to be part history lesson. So we'll go through a bit of a timeline in case people are unfamiliar with how all of the witch hunting and heresy and all of the Inquisition began in the first place. We'll be trying to fill in some gaps for you, also with things that it reminds us of in popular culture.
Hopefully some insight into more modern times of what witchcraft has turned into as well.
Yeah.
And some personal insight.
And some personal insight and illusions and allegories.
One thing that I think is going to be important as we go forward is just, this has been a theme on the other podcast. It's not just a pitch, but it's been a theme in my life and a theme in everything that I've been talking about. But we need to remember that people in history are not fucking stupid. We have not gotten smarter. We've gotten more informed. They were not stupid in the Middle Ages. And so when you're looking at things like the witch trials, it's not just because everyone was a dumbass. It's because of something that could still be applicable now.
These were calculated purges. And that's something that's important to know, I think.
Also makes it a little more fucked up.
Right?
Yeah, it kind of makes it a little worse.
And horrifying.
Yeah, and pretty horrifying because they're like, you know what? We've actually sat and had a meeting about this, and we're going to kill a lot of people.
Okay, but to be fair, there are enough dumbasses to follow them for this to happen in the first place.
But here's something that
Ooh,
I
some notes.
love.
He got the
yeah,
notes.
I brought notes, guys.
It's Russell's papers.
At least someone did.
but there was actually I'm not even gonna check the notes because I know this happened multiple times. I can find you sources if you want, but the multiple witch trials began and ended simply off of essentially government subsidies. Like, people are doing these things, and many of them, it's not that they were so stupid that they believed that someone's stealing their penises while they were sleeping, which is a genuine statement
Yeah.
that was made by many people. For some reason, all this is based around sex, and we'll get into that. But it's not just that everyone genuinely believed this, but when you produce a system where you literally get paid for selling your neighbor to the church,
True.
it's going to happen. And many of these witch trials, the thing that stopped it, because, that might be an important thing to consider, and a lot of people just don't. They just think, oh my God, they finally realized how much blood was spilled, and they stopped doing it. No.
They
No.
still do it to this day.
They still do it to this day. That's also true. And this also connects into colonialism, which is, huge applicability there. But as soon as they stopped essentially subsidizing witch trials would just stop. Crazy.
It's almost as if
It's money's fault.
It's almost as if
Yes.
advancements in
Blame capitalism.
technology basically they don't really help the humanity progress forward. They just help them oppress them in different ways.
Yeah, that's so extremely important. Is the idea that advancement actually kind of doesn't exist at all. Technological advancement,
That's what I'm talking about,
technological change, right? Exactly, and how in a lot of ways, and I don't have notes on this. I wasn't expecting to have to talk about Foucault today. Sorry. But in so many ways, the cruelty that exists inside of the world hasn't lessened, but it's just become more nuanced. And so whereas we used to take people and burn them at the stake, we now have extremely complex ways of tormenting and controlling people their entire lives and then torture them and kill them behind closed doors.
Damn.
We're all nodding in agreement.
It really is. It comes down to things like language, like how people discuss these issues as well. And it's like they're not issues to the people discussing them and things like that. I mean, we're seeing that with, like sexism from like the, far right and stuff like that as well. Or the, the subjugation of women in our society in general through either like tax breaks or birthing laws or, abortion laws rather.
Yes, some very complex bureaucracy.
Yeah, it really is that complex. It's almost like how do you even coalesce all of this into one thing to stamp out the problem, because the problem branches out.
It's like they figured it out. They called them witches and then made a guide on how to kill them.
Right.
Yeah.
That's such an interesting point, because I was wondering if I'd be able to bring this up at all. But that's a perfect way in. So before the witch trials really began in like the 14th century, which is where they primarily kind of blew up, we still had a concept of witches, right?
Yeah.
But there's this really bizarre linguistic phenomena that happens in Rome, where rather than just having one word for witch, you have, I wrote some of them down, and I don't speak Latin, so I'm sorry. I understand some of it, but I'm going to mispronounce all the words. Cantatrix, Precantatrix, Secerdos, Vates, Docta, Divina, Saga, Maga, Venefica, Malefica, Lamia, Lupula, Strix, or Striga were all, and not the ultimate list, but those were all terms used for witches of specific types in ancient Rome. And so they had essentially, what that implies to me, and I think I have ground to stand on with this, but it implies that there is a social usage, right? Because if you end up cutting something into that many pieces, you allow it to be nuanced enough for you to interact with it legibly, right? That there's a kind of linguistic legalism or pact where if you have 1,000 words for something, it means that you are allowed to engage with it. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. It's nuanced, right? But as soon as you change something to just being malefica, or eventually witch, it's a good way to just say, well, everyone in this bucket is evil. It's essentially how like slurs appear, right?
Yeah. That's what I was thinking.
Generalizes a whole class system that's really existing within the witchcraft and magical communities that existed throughout time.
Exactly. And so much of this stuff occurs on purpose through literary sources, or not so much literary, though that is true, but literate sources. So whenever we have these witch trials, one of the things that will reliably occur is that these things begin with the literate classes. They don't start with that like totally uneducated neighbor guy. They start with a child conveniently saying something to someone from the clerical class or someone from another kind of class of import and literacy, who then divines some kind of document that then ends up being placed upon other people who are not literate, and the non-literate classes then go on to be things like witchfinders. So it is invariably a genuine conspiracy produced by the bourgeoisie, if I'm allowed to call them that, which I am. But upon the proletariat, using the proletariat to bring them more money. It's just another scam.
Very accurate. I feel like it's just the one of many scams that the Catholic Church came up with to bring themselves more money to continue a crusade that began a long while ago.
I mean, you can use the examples of like early women owning businesses and things like that, and then that
and then suddenly they couldn't.
Then also, all of a sudden, then you couldn't do
there
that.
was these
or
rules
it was
that got
about,
put in place.
Usurping them from those positions and things like that. So it really is like this crazy conspiracy thing that's just really tied to money.
Or they made like
things.
some sort of a fraternity where women were just not allowed. And then they created these class systems like if you're in the army or something, where they're like, there's no women here, they're not allowed to be in this, so why would they be in the hall to talk with us about these things? And then it became an exclusionary thing.
The demonology, the demonology of like the term of, like the witch, like it was basically used to like, I mean, the idea of a housewife was somewhat prevalent, but it was more pushed onto them once those systems were corrupted like that.
So in 1530, there were approximately 75 guilds inside of the urban spaces of Western Europe. Guess how many of those included women?
I'm going to go with 0.
Any other guesses?
2.
3.
30.
70.
Oh,
70 out of 75 included women. But then this is all a very slow transition. Mm-hmm. Some things occurred before that which made it very hard to keep capital and keep power in motion, right? And these things were things like the Little Ice Age, which is not a genuine ice age, but it is a huge, downturn in temperature, a huge climate catastrophe that led to famines all over the place. We also had the Black Plague. We had some huge wars. And so what occurred was that suddenly the only surviving labor force becomes a labor force that is able to vouch for itself. It becomes a series of people that say, hey, if you want me to work in this fucking mill, you have to pay me, and you have to pay me pretty well. And so suddenly labor power has power. And that's not something that people in control of private property like. And so their response, of course, is to try to produce more labor power, right? And to produce more labor power, paradoxically, their choice, and some of this was conscious, and a great majority of it wasn't, but was to control things like reproductive production, right? So you strip women out of the workforce so that their only job was to make 30 kids.
Jesus.
Fuck.
Imagine having 30 kids.
I mean, even with with that like that subjugation that was just mentioned right there, you also have like this the idea that if you do this and you do it under the guise of like religious fanaticism, you are also creating like you're basically forcing them to create more people just like that, essentially.
This sorry, this is completely off topic from witches, but it has to do with the persecution of the gays. If you always talk to like religious figures, they're always, and you tell them like, oh, I'm like, you know, if it doesn't continue the means of reproduction, then they're not about it. The church always hates it. Are you going to masturbate? Don't do that. You can't get a baby from that.
It's true.
You're going to do that in the butt? No, you can't get a baby from that. Stop.
It's
If
like,
they're
I
not,
thought that was a great
if they're
loophole.
not making another a kid into the chair of the church, they don't want
God.
anything to fucking do with it.
Exactly. That's great. What I want to do. I want to do really quick exercise, but you know, we brought up slurs, stereotypes. We've brought up, you know, what becomes women's work, things like that. But when you envision a witch, a stereotypical witch, what are the attributes of this person?
They always have really grotesque faces, discolored skin, warts, big nose, scraggly hair, messed up teeth.
Yeah,
Just ugly.
the popular media version of
Yeah.
it.
Stirring the cauldron, riding past the moon upon a broomstick.
Every
Yes.
now and again, though, they're really hot.
The big ass hat.
Yeah,
they're
absolutely,
meant
yes,
to
of
be like
course.
They're meant to seduce you.
Yeah, like in The Witch.
Yeah,
When,
like,
he
you know,
seduced
they
the
take
kid.
on some form, or like it even happens in like, it's not necessarily a witch, but like in Game of Thrones, she's ugly looking, but she actually puts on the persona of somebody who's really attractive, and then they don't realize it until like it kind of drops.
Right. And what else do they do?
Ooh.
Eat babies.
Dance naked under the moonlight.
I mean, that's kind of accurate.
Make potions and
Yeah.
brews and bubbling.
Yeah, they usually will help somebody gain some power, but usually at some sort of cost.
Or they're just fucking shit up for funsies.
Yeah, or they're
Yeah.
just, really, they're just kind of
They live in a cottage on the outside of town.
Yeah.
What if I told you, in a way that I promise isn't problematic, is that all of these things just describe certain types of women?
Yeah, at some point, I think it took one feature attribute and then exaggerated it to an
Exactly.
extreme. Yeah.
So when we talk about like a horrible complexion with warts and things like that, we're simply talking about old women who are holding on to property that you want to take said property from.
Yes.
True.
Who don't have children,
Yeah.
who don't have someone else controlling their means. When we're talking about riding around on broomsticks and stirring cauldrons, like how far from like women's work, quote unquote, is that? That's
Right.
like that's just a parody of that. Killing babies, eating babies, using potions as performance for abortion or birth control, which is very common. Having a garden even could be used as a way of accusing someone of witchcraft.
Right, just
Yeah.
having the herbs and stuff to
Right.
Ooh,
naturally heal
And in
yourself.
a lot of cases, these women were also like the medicine women of the
Exactly.
villages. They had a
Yes.
lot of knowledge pertaining to health and wealth and all that
Things
good
they
stuff.
did not understand
Yep.
themselves.
In
Yeah.
fact, in the 16th century, it was actually very, very common for women to even work in the cities as
Right.
medicine people, right? As doctors, things of the
So
sort.
you'd go visit them wherever they were living at.
Yeah.
Right. But once they were forced out of, you know, the urban workplaces, which was also a kind of a space of panic, we have to keep people out of this kind of urban sprawl because we need to keep the farms and shit alive. You end up accusing women of being witches, and so they get forced out of the workplace because they can only make kids. And then upon moving home and continuing the same work that they did elsewhere, simply because their garden is at home, and they mix their medicine essentially in the home, it becomes witchcraft instead of medicine. That's the only change. I mean, if you think about medicine largely up until a certain point, and maybe even now, it is indiscernible from witchcraft. Leeches and shit? Like,
Yeah.
Like, do you know how George Washington died?
I don't actually.
They bled him to death.
Oh, I
Cool.
did not
They
know that.
gradually bled him to death because he was like, I don't know, woozy. And then here's a crazy thing that happens when you lose blood. You get woozy.
Yeah. So I was
Well,
like,
I had no idea.
I wanted to mention that around that time that you were talking about that with the persecution of like older women, hag used to be a good term back in the day. It used to basically, if a woman was old enough of age and she was a hag, it basically meant that she lived a long life. She has a lot of experience and maturity.
Yeah.
She could help the younger generation. And like you said, as soon as that, like, they demonize it because famines are happening, plagues are happening.
Right.
And for some reason, that hag all the way over there on the other side of town in her little cottage, she seems to be doing perfectly fine because she's self-sufficient.
Right? And
Yeah.
she's holding on to money that could belong to someone else. I know that at least one person here could answer the question, but Wicca has a certain symbol with moons.
Yeah.
What do those mean?
The triple moon.
What does
So
it mean?
the triple moon is a representation of the stages of life, essentially. So the first one is representative of the maiden, which is like youth. After that, you have the mother, so she's in her middle age, maturity, able to bear children, and then the final one is the crone, the old lady.
So what you actually mean is prostitutes, hags that are holding on to my money, and then the women that I'm okay with.
Pretty much.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that's what they got people to believe in at that time, because prior to it, you had the regular belief of what most people were doing at that time, which is completely normal. And then at some point, they're like, we kind of need some stuff from these people. So especially these women who are kind of hanging on to this stuff, and then they started creating alternate views of what you might see, the same way that they did it to younger women, where they're like, this, like guys who couldn't keep control of themselves and keep it in their pants, they're like, she's obviously too hot, she's a witch, and like had to put in some sort of weird twist on it because they couldn't help themselves. And then chances are they'd probably do something terrible and rape them and then tell them that they were a witch and then send them to the witch trial so they die and nobody ever finds out. So like things like that would happen.
And also so they don't get in trouble with their actual wife.
Yeah, also so their wife doesn't kill them.
It's like, she cursed me, I swear I didn't do it.
Yeah, right. So it's like this is like the precursor to basically blaming the women for things that they were doing for the actions of whatever anyone else did to them. So
Can't
it's
have
like,
a garden.
Yeah, you know,
Can't hang out with cats.
Jeez.
I mean, and a lot of these like I guess like ancient cultures and whatnot didn't outside of like, you know, where the Maleficarum comes from and all of that, didn't necessarily harbor these ideas as strongly, I would say, to a certain extent, because they were like, oh, you have skills at doing things, we need to survive. You have skills to do the thing. Awesome. We're gonna respect the living fuck out of you because you can do the thing that we cannot. You know, and so
Not to mention they literally bring life into the world.
Yeah,
you know,
that's also like that. That's also
Yeah.
a really big, like a really important point as well. So you know, you'd have that. So it's very interesting to see that that huge difference of just like complete disregard for all of these ideas, and instead just, you know, we'll use this book to like burn the weird ones at the stake.
Is it my understanding that it was actually something that was written and published? Like, this is a real book you could have gotten at that time?
The Hammer of Witches.
Okay, because I thought maybe it might be like some separate writings that were like eventually collected, but like this is a legit guide you could have gotten at the time.
I definitely did my research on this one because it was a documentary I saw. But they basically, this man, I'm trying to remember his name. Here
There
it
were
is.
two of them. There was
Yes.
Heinrich Kramer.
Yep,
is
he's
the one
like
that I'm obsessed
Kramer.
with.
Yeah.
He's so fucking funny.
The main one. Henrik Kramer is like primarily like credited, but he was a churchgoer, a church guy. He would basically have sermons back into like the 1400s in what is now present day Germany. Eventually, he would notice that a group of women would not attend these, and instead they would hang out with each other and basically just talk shit about him.
Love it.
They would like drink wine. They would dance with each other. They would sometimes cheat on their husbands with each other.
Yes.
So he kind of
All
felt
of
like
it.
he kind of felt, I think personally, a little jealous and a little pissed
my
off.
God,
that they
if
want to
I-
go to his sermon. So
If you read through this text, it is this man is preoccupied with sex in a funny way, and
hear
both
it.
sex and gender. Right, but of course, at that point in time, it seems, at least in this area of the world, indistinguishable from certain people's eyes, and now, I guess. Kramer, so he actually succeeded in starting a witch trial before he wrote this book, I believe.
yes, correct.
And so this trial was in Innsbruck, and the woman was Helena Schubrin.
Nice.
And so this witch trial was going fine, but eventually he got kicked off of it, and then the witch trial was suspended.
The Pope didn't want him there.
The Pope didn't want him there, and the reason that I've seen given for why it was suspended and he was kicked off is because he was so weirdly obsessed with Helena's sexuality.
Ooh.
He just could not stop fucking talking about this woman fucking. And so he got kicked out, and then he wrote this incel book about how women
Yes.
having sex is bad,
Oh my
and whenever
God.
you fuck, it's for the devil, unless you're fucking specifically for Christ.
So
Fuck it
and
for
thereby
Jesus.
him.
Yeah.
Right.
So this is my favorite part of this entire story. Everyone's like, you wrote this book, and it's basically made to prosecute people. What's your source? And he literally goes, fucking God, and points to the Bible and brings up verses from the Bible that prosecute
Oh
witches.
my God.
I mean, is that weird though? from
It's
these
no,
people?
I find it funny. Like, what's your source? Divine light. Like, just pointing to the Bible and just like, that's my fucking source.
It's on brand, is
God.
what we're
Right.
trying to say here.
And,
Yeah,
and the
for
best
real.
part about it is, so here's Henrik Kramer. He's fucking backed by God in parentheses. And then he makes a clause in the book that says, if you are to save a witch like this or keep them away from the church, you and yourself are the problem. If you're not with us, you're against us, basically.
Ah, yes.
So-
reading parts of that book, it's fucked up.
It is.
There's certain moments of it, or that I'm reading through it. I'm like, wait, you said that if they do this thing, then immediately they're a witch. I'm like, but why are you so concerned with certain things that are happening like this? And you just like, wow, he really sat there and was like obsessed with not only women's bodies, but like what the fuck they were doing on their free
Right.
time.
And so pulling this back a little bit, but also kind of continuing with it. Mitch mentioned the fact that we didn't have the same type of obsessions in previous periods in history, and I largely agree with that, right? So, but I think it's interesting to try to sort out why, apart from this strange like new eruption of capital performing enclosure upon the commons, and the whole this entire system changing, and the Black Death and the Little Ice Age, and there's more to it than that. Surprise. But when you looked at witches or oracles or whatnot in Greece and Rome, these are in fact people oftentimes that, I mean, sometimes they're baddies, just like anyone
Yeah.
is, but, or there are specific types of witches that are bad, like I said before. But an oracle exists to tell you about fate.
Right. It wasn't necessarily a inherently bad thing.
And what's really interesting to me about this, and this ultimately goes back to pretty much every academic piece that I've ever done, so I'm obsessed with this question, but there's a certain point in history, or in perception, because this applies all over the place and becomes ambiguous everywhere. When does an oracle or a witch, we'll just call them all witches, when does a witch cause something to happen through a curse, and when is it a prophecy?
Most likely when it benefits or does not benefit someone.
Well, that's
I
just
think.
a curse or a blessing.
Yeah.
Right? Because
Yeah.
a prophecy can still say you're going to
That's
fuck your
true.
mom and kill your dad. And that's not good for anyone.
Oh,
Right? So, because
There-
that's the most famous instance of prophecy, I think, in like Greek legend, is Oedipus.
Yeah.
And so there's something that ends up changing when it comes to the way that we view causality. So there was this entire period, because I think the gods were included in it, where everyone is subject to fate. And so Zeus is subject to fate, and everyone is fucking subject to fate. You just have to deal with it. And you can fight against it, but then these three women again will decide whether or not, who are defended by three women, and all these women, but will decide whether or not this is going to work out. And it never does. But later on, when God removes himself from causality, when God is omnipotent and omnipresent, he ends up deciding that everything is predestined, right? Necessarily. And that produces a really weird question, because suddenly he is responsible. It's that question that every 15-year-old atheist ends up asking, where, okay, so if God is all powerful and he allows bad to happen, then he's bad, and yada, yada, yada. So why do bad things happen? And the Protestants have a really interesting answer for that as part of their whole sola fide, sola gratia kind of setup, where they say, if you go to heaven, that's part of God's plan. If you don't go to heaven, that's because you were allowed free will and you wove yourself down there. So the world is predestined and God has power over everything, except for when you choose to take his power away. Or avoid his power, walk away from his power. And there's a whole very complicated medieval legacy of making sense of that, which would take hours to describe. And it's really interesting, but also at the same time kind of eye-rolling, right? And it all comes from Aristotle. Surprise.
Surprise.
That's my boy.
That's right. No, who's the guy who said there's nowhere to spit in a rich man's house except in his face?
Diogenes of Sinope. Yeah.
That's my boy.
My boy. Also, when Alexander the Great came to him and announced himself, he said, "Get out of my son." This is also what I said to my... Never mind.
Based.
But the reason I bring up that whole really kind of boring, monotonous rant is because when it comes to witches can't have control of the world, right?
Right.
A witch can't be cursing us. A witch's performance has to either be a prophetic estimation of what's about to occur, and we can't say that because they always have to be bad. Or it can be a curse, but only if they have made a pact with the devil in order to function through people and other people in order to allow something to occur. So even if the devil doesn't exist, and even if witches don't exist, witches can still do bad because they have chosen to do bad because they have decided to look away from God. It's this bizarre thing. And so the reason I bring all this up is because Murr ended up mentioning that, if you're defending a witch or if you're not helping us out, you're against us. And it's because you become part of this network of people facing away from God.
Oh, gotcha.
Which is also what you're seeing in Dante and stuff, which is literally the further into hell, the reason it's a cone that reaches down is because the further in hell you are, the more distant you are from God.
Yeah.
Literally. And so people think this way.
Yeah.
There was a great documentary from the 1920s called Haxan, Witchcraft
I've
Through
heard
the
of
Ages.
this.
If you check it out, it basically shows you what the belief was for some of these people to identify witches, as well as like some like testimonial things like, oh yes, for you to actually be able to curse and do that stuff, you have to kiss the ass of the devil.
That's funny. I like that any mention of people who made deals with the devil, because it seems to be like kind of rare and far in between that they actually made a legitimate deal with the devil. And most of the time, they almost always get something rad, and then they end up like only having to do certain things, or they're like, yeah, I'll give you my soul or something like that. But it's always mentioned on like really precise moments, and that's like the turning point for most people to be like, well, they made a deal with the devil, so everyone else can do it, and they're like, well, no one else has really done it. So then you get these weird conversations of like, well, what do they actually do? But I feel like I would offer that I think there was probably a large change in mindset towards how people felt about witchcraft because it came down to whether or not people had faith in a certain thing or not. And so in some ways, I think a lot of people had faith in God, and that's all they needed. And so then they had these things where like, well, God told me to do this, so let's do it. And so then that was sort of like the general thing, maybe a little more simplified, but still they were able to kind of come together under this one thing and be able to prosecute evil, which made them feel better about anything that they might be doing.
Right. No, that's great. And so if we think back to the last episode that I was on here for with Roko's Basilisk, that whole paradox where it's like playing the game where as soon as you think about the game, you lose the game. that was also occurring for people in the witch trials.
Yes.
So during the Trier? Yeah, the Trier trials in the like late 16th century, which is one of the worst ones, like 1,000 people died. What percentage of these people do you think were in the higher classes?
Oh,
I
fucking
feel like,
none.
Yeah, I don't think it was a whole lot.
What era are we talking about again?
1680. About.
I would think actually there might be a lot more than we think, to be honest, because if you're talking about like the subjugation of an entire
I think
Actually,
if they probably did it more privately, I would say, than
Yeah.
anything else. Then they got someone else to do.
I mean,
like
were
that.
there women in positions of power in that area?
Absolutely.
And would they? So
Aristocratic family.
okay, aristocratic
Yeah,
families.
yeah,
So
that's
if
about
they
it.
were trying to demean and like decentralize the powers of the aristocratic families, then yes.
Or like situations like, oh, she's gonna get like inheritance from this. What if we just
that's when it gets
say
into
that
some of
she's
the
a
politics.
witch, and then she's removed from the equation? And
Yeah.
then,
Yeah, because dad is old and he's gonna die and she'll become queen.
So I would say generally that, and I will answer your question, but there are 3 different reasons to accuse someone of witchcraft, right? Number 1, because you are a child and a little girl pissed you off, which seems to happen a lot, and that's really scary.
Yeah, that's like a lot of the cases where they're like they did something to piss off this person. They're like, well,
extremely common. We'll go over a few of those. But little boys getting pissed off about a little girl, and
Yeah.
starting a witch trial.
Holy shit.
The second of which is that you've just done something kind of weird, like, I don't know, raping someone or making someone feel uncomfortable and then have to accuse them of something weird, like being a sex monster witch. Or there is an old hag or your sister or aunt or something who, like, has money that they shouldn't have and you want to get it. And that one actually seems to be the bulk of them. I mean, eventually children are used as tools in these witch findings, where it's just like, hey, little boy, who do you think's a witch? And then they say, actually, I don't know of any witches, and then you put them under ice water for a while, and they're like, I don't know, everyone's a witch!
Oh, no. I shouldn't be laughing,
Real
but that's
story.
literally what happened.
Oh,
Yeah.
there's worse shit, too. But so 30% of the people killed in the Trier trials were from the aristocracy.
Yeah.
Which, especially if you consider the fact that the aristocracy, I'm going to pronounce it in like 4 different ways, that the majority of these people are probably still men, because that includes things like clergy, that if we were to estimate the ratios and kind of adjust them for the fact that there's a higher ratio of men to women in these kind of spaces, that the likelihood of you being accused of being a witch and being in a place of power as a woman is extraordinarily high, I would say. I mean, 30% is already very high, but I would be comfortable saying it's at least 50 in the aristocracy, which also less aristocrats, right? Or fewer of them, and so
Less competition.
Extremely common. Less competition, less people to knock off. Also, just with the law of averages, if there's less of you, and then it happens to 50% of you.
I feel like this sort of conveniently fell in their lap at that time period too, where they're just like, "Oh, we can use this system to get rid of certain people."
And you made a book, and we could publish this.
That's what I'm saying too. And I think at some point the church was like, "Whoa, we don't support this. We support this, but
Right.
just don't do that in public everywhere. Just kind of figure it out. Like do it in certain areas."
Right.
They
so,
support it if it's beneficial to them.
Yeah, so like,
Right.
of course they totally supported it because they want to control power in certain regions,
Actually,
but
so
they couldn't
many-
publicly say it though.
Right. Well, actually, so many of the witch trials occurred and kind of popped up in locations simply because there was a trial or rumor of a trial somewhere, and then some local priest ended up talking about the witch trials as a way to be like, and don't y'all be bad, and that just causes a witch trial to occur there.
Yeah.
Because people are like, oh, witches exist. Fuck.
Yeah, it's pretty much, exactly.
But Trier is one of the examples of the locations where it did stop when the church stopped incentivizing it.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it started with them saying, we'll give you 40% of the property. I'm making up that number. I don't know what the number was. But we'll give you a portion of this person's property if they're a witch. And It's like, then fucking everyone I know is a witch. Are you
exactly.
kidding?
They're like, yes, I'm
That
definitely
lady
going to
who
bring
looked
people.
at me weird, she's a witch.
Jeez.
That one lady that denied me, yeah, she's a witch too.
Right. Everyone you've ever cheated on your wife with is a witch suddenly. Two birds, one stone, easily done.
I saw that such and such didn't go to church yesterday.
Right.
What a witch.
We've even had now in popular media a few different versions of what may have happened, or probably not as extreme, but you have like variations on what's happening. You even have it's not necessarily witches, but like control of the women and like their whether or not they can have kids in The Handmaid's Tale. And you have like they did make a movie about certain pieces of the witch trial, and then the books and all that. They're like the Crucible we've brought up before, where so it's like you have all of these things that came together.
Interesting thing about, because we have off the top of my head right now, we've got Hereditary, which deals with that. We've got The Witch, which also deals with this, and then we've also got The Crucible. All of those, just like Dorian was mentioning, involve children in some way, or those children being a part of the accusations,
Right.
and things like that. So they listen to the children a lot when it comes to those things. At least that's how the movies portray
well, they
it. But
have
it
this
seems
they have
not
this
far
idea
off.
that in many ways any children that are going to say something about someone, they're supposed to be this like unfiltered truth because they're not meant to have this prejudice as a child, but they are getting it because there's certain people who are telling them certain things. So it's
Yeah.
like they're obviously going to push someone a certain way,
Right.
and
It's
then
like,
everyone
hey,
believes
little-
them.
Hey, little Jimmy, I'll give you 3 quarters if you say this about
Do you
this
know how
person.
easy it is to get a kid to do something like that? Like just to say, yes, this
yeah.
person did something like that with, I don't know, fucking candy or whatever.
Right.
It'd be super easy to do something like that.
I'll
So
give you
they
some sugar.
caught on to that quick, and we're like, yeah, we're going to fucking get all these people to get accused of something.
It gets
It'd be
messy.
easy.
It gets messy when the familiars are brought in too, because typically familiars for witches are like frogs, cats.
Dogs, even birds.
Dogs, birds. Yeah. So even just having a pet could get you
a black cat.
a fucking fire.
having butterflies around you. I'm not kidding. So
just hanging out around.
The etymology of butterfly, and I forget the Dutch word, and I've already butchered Latin, so I'll save you guys. It's fine. You guys already have to hear me like overpronounce trieux. But I don't speak French either. I just like a lot of French philosophy. But the Dutch word for butterfly is something that essentially translates to butter shit.
Cool.
Right? And the reason for that is because butterflies were believed to be the familiars of witches. Either familiars cast by witches or familiars that were themselves witches. And so one way or another, butterflies they thought were witches. Because butterflies would come into your home and they would think that they would drink your butter.
Because, oh my God.
Because their poop looks like butter. Apparently. It's like a off-white substance.
Cool.
In fact, butterflies don't drink butter. It just looks like they poop it. And so all of these weird assumptions come together, and that's why they're butterflies, because butter shit was a little weird to say, and so it became butterfly, because it's a flying shit.
Oh my God.
And so even butterflies could be witch familiars. It's a bizarre thing.
Just squish every butterfly you see.
Well,
fades on sight.
That's very interesting because I know in popular Japanese culture, if there is a flurry of butterflies that are yellow, it's basically meant to signify that a war is coming. So even then, like thinking back with this like allusion to like witches, it sounds interesting to hear like different ideas from around the world at this time, because there's so many persecutions around the world, like, and also we haven't even touched on the stuff that's happened in Africa with like voodoo and such like that, or in the Americas where like the stuff from the Crucible happened. But it's a very interesting thing to see how the narrative is shifted through geography.
Yeah, there seems to be very specific reasons as to why it sort of came to be and why people were prosecuted in different areas of the world. Roughly the same idea, but it was slightly different wherever you were at.
And I would say in a lot of colonized areas, this sort of witchcraft was demonized in order to sort of marginalize the indigenous people of the
Basically,
area.
anything that wasn't whatever the colonists were bringing over was witchcraft to them. And so their own culture that they had existed in for thousands of years was suddenly witchcraft, and then they got prosecuted for that.
Is that why white people don't use seasoning still?
It is.
There's a couple reasons for that, but definitely.
So they sure as fuck didn't bring it over.
Seasoning is definitely
allergy to pepper.
No, honestly though, seasoning is definitely related to witchcraft in a lot of ways, because these herbs that are used commonly in witchcraft are also used on food.
Oh, yeah.
Like half the shit I use in spell work or anything like that, I get from my fucking cabinet.
Nice.
Yeah.
I do have a little box though of special ones. But yeah.
I like practicing hoodoo. I think that stuff's fun.
I don't think you can.
What?
Hoodoo?
Yeah, hoodoo. HOODO.
I don't know about that, dude.
Per my understanding,
black.
hoodoo is it's what we usually think of in popular culture as being voodoo.
Yeah.
Right?
Hoodoo's a little different.
Yeah, hoodoo actually is where you have things like curses involved, whereas voodoo is more of just like a version of saint worship, but what by different names?
Well, voodoo
or
is
God
sort of
worship
like,
by saint names? No, that's
it's
Santeria.
like
They're all kind of blending together.
A necromancy sort of thing, in that
Isn't that
voodoo
more
is
the
where
hoodoo
you're
end?
sort of channeling ancestors. It's ancestral work.
Oh, right.
Yeah, the saint-based one you're mentioning is Santeria, which is like Latin America,
Noticing those
America
things, how like they'd write certain names on stuff, put it in the ground, that kind of stuff. Just like that very grassroots style of just making stuff work. Trying to get the durations too. You got to do it several times a day if you're trying to make it work fast.
Yeah, you got to feed it energy.
Yep. Segue.
We need to go back and revisit the timeline. So after the book is published, what happens next?
Well, something that kind of blows my mind, because we're talking about like the new world and involvement when it comes to like the slave trade and colonialism. It blows my mind. Maybe this works better in people's heads because their timelines work better. But in the 1500s, we had witch trials happening in Europe, right? We had a slave trade in the New World for like 150 years before that.
Yeah.
Like, this is shit that's already occurring.
That to me doesn't seem to align well, and I agree. I'm just like, wait, these all that were happening at the same time. I usually like to think of them as happening like right next to each other, like back to back, but it's not. There's a lot of things happening and overlapping, and this is one of them.
Right.
Yeah.
The thing that blows my fucking mind is that Shakespeare was writing his plays while we were in the Americas. We, as in the genocidal white people.
It's not me.
Crazy to me.
The overlap.
Right. But one of the big things about this, to bring it back into something linguistic, is that there are like 3 words that are really used for people that could be killed in something like an Inquisition. There's pagans, heathens, and heretics. And all of these etymologically connect to location, more or less. And the location is something that's kind of metaphorical. So when we have heretics, a heretic is mostly what you're going to kill in a witch trial. Because they are, but not exclusively. There's someone that lives as your neighbor, and they say something against your general belief, but seem to carry a lot of what you also believe. It's like, yeah, I believe in Jesus, but the world might be round. Isn't that fucking crazy? And the reason that you see so many people who are heretics and witches that are killed is because it's more convenient to be killing people within your kind of neighborhood, right? And if they believe in this kind of stuff, it's a lot easier to like build up the drama in the courtroom, things like that.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what they were doing.
No, I love God. I would never touch Satan. Instead of like, Satan's not real. Fuck you.
I had to look it up, but so I was like, I'm pretty sure this was when like people like Pizarro from Spain went to the Incas and just fucking massacred a whole bunch of people.
What year was that?
That was 1532.
Right, and Columbus was like 14.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you're just like, oh, fuck, there's all these things happening at the same time. So, like, while this is happening in Europe, there's genocide happening in Latin America because of colonialism.
Right.
And so, like, you have several things happening all at once, including, like, the slave trade. So you just had all these bad things happening all at once, and they kind of get overlooked because you're focusing on one way and then another way. And then who ends up writing it anyway? The people who were usually in charge are writing these histories.
And if anyone else wrote about it, it was burned.
You get a lot of missing.
Right. Another crazy thing about it is the Salem witch trials were, I forget the exact year, but it's somewhere in the late 1600s. And so we had witch trials going on for like 400 fucking years.
Over 300,000 dead.
Yeah. And some of them in these like crazy pockets of like 700 dead. Like just fucking insane. But the other 2 words, pagan and heathen, a heathen, God, I always get this a little bit wrong. I confuse these 2 of them. But pagan and heathen, one of them means someone who lives in the villages, and one of them means someone who lives... Yeah, pagan is someone who lives in the villages, because heathen comes from the heath. So pagans come from the villages, so they're people that might have something in common with you, but ultimately are no-nos, which is, like the people, the pagans in Rome, the non-believers who you're able to kind of convert, which is why we have people like the... Actually, most often, I think when we think of pagans, we think of like Scandinavian tribes and like druids and stuff, which are in fact pretty correctly named pagans because they started converting like the 8th to 12th century. And so they were very early converts to Christianity, and thereby, if they're around people who don't believe in it, people who are like worshiping Odin and things like that, it's because, they're just a hanger. They're hanging on while their neighbors who become Christians. And then there's the heathens. The heathens in the woods, the people who are way out there who you totally disagree. And heathens are never going to be the people until we start integrating them who are accused of witchcraft because they're too far away. You don't care.
Yeah.
Right? And then you start using them as things like slaves, and then the heathen religions become a real fucking problem.
Yeah.
Oh. Can I get a ope?
Oh. And I mean, like you were saying, I'm more familiar with Santeria. Pretty much everything that I know about voodoo or hoodoo is something that I've heard like secondhand through a documentary somewhere.
Right.
But what I do know about Santeria, and I assumed that it was more common throughout them, is that you have this interesting blending due to trying to hide things, but also just this like the organic movement of culture using Christian saints in order to represent deities from your homeland, right?
Yeah,
And
it's remnants of leftover things that they were showing at some point that got transitioned to saints that they could no longer show anymore because of the colonialism that happened that brought in that Christianity, which is now like pretty dominant in the religion in South and Latin America, which is going to be like Catholicism, Christianity is going to be like what dominates, and so then you have pockets of people who believe in these certain things.
And Catholicism is already like, if you fucking think about it, Catholicism's witchcraft, guys. It's
Oh,
total
it really
witchcraft.
is.
Yeah.
You're doing
Just the whole
cannibalism,
ceremony,
you're chanting
everything
Latin.
you're doing.
I
Yeah.
was about to say, I remember back when I
That's
was younger
real
and
as
I
fuck.
was actually like going to church, and we always had like weird things that we would do. We would have to like sing songs, and they'd like proceed out and read this book, and we had to drink the wine and eat the bread. And then learning about Wiccan and pagan ceremonies, they're exactly
They're doing
the same.
everything in it.
It's just sort of a different like thing that you are calling out to when you're doing these ceremonies. On one hand, you have the Catholics who are calling out to their god or whatever, and then you have the pagans who might be calling out to multiple gods.
Yeah,
Right.
it's kind of wild to me that they still will come out and have like the incense burning in the I forget what it's called, but the the thing they wave around and they're like
Right, the
bringing
censer.
Yeah, and they
Yeah.
keep doing that, and that's like part of the whole thing. In addition to this symbolic presence of taking something in, which
Right.
is
Right.
supposed to mean something else, and it's like blood and body and flesh. So it's like this
Yeah.
is
And,
this
like,
is kind
the
of significant.
The parallels between the two of them make it a lot easier for people to convert, because
Yeah.
a lot of
Right.
people used to worship in this way for a long time.
That's a good point.
And then here comes Christianity and Catholicism, and they do it similarly. So people are like, okay, this is kind of the same. I guess I can get with it.
It's also important to realize that Protestant is, and I'm not a Richard Dawkins guy, okay? And I respect a lot of the theological work that's been constructed around this. I think it's very interesting, especially around free will, pretty much only around free will. But Protestants, your theology fucking sucks. It doesn't, it's unnuanced, it's broken, it ignores so much shit from the past because people like Jews who fucking have a dope theology and Catholics who are fucking crazy recognize, at least some Catholics, maybe probably a lot of modern Catholics don't, but they don't actually look at the world as having one God.
Yeah.
They fucking don't. If you look at the Bible, if you look at a lot of the the texts around this, Gnostic or Catholic or Jewish or fucking anything that isn't your lutefisk eating whatever. I'm not going to make slurs for Protestants, but I'm very
Do
frustrated with them.
Do it.
I'll just call them lutefisks. But they recognize that there are other gods, right? But that their God is the best one. And so that's where there's this interesting bleed between the heathens and the Catholics, and then also makes it so that, I mean, even if Catholics only believe in one God, they believe in so many fucking saints. Like,
Yeah,
that's
that
how
was-
you have.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
another
Right,
thing
that's
too.
how
And the
Santeria comes up.
archangels.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And Christ himself is deified, but he's not God.
Oh,
we
should
call
not-
it the Christian religion.
We
after
can't try to
Christ.
sort out the Trinity tonight. There's been too many wars fought over that.
There's been an idea offered that the reason why they came into the idea of this sainthood was that so that there was something that people could strive towards and an achievable goal that you could get within the church, aka an incentive for you to follow this religion and do quote unquote good things. And so this was something they brought in. Also, they would put people into sainthood that belong to a certain area of peoples that they then would indoctrinate into their belief system to be like, hey, we like that guy too. He's a saint now. So you guys want to be a part of what we're doing?
It's also convenient that saints are made saints, generally speaking, not
After
always,
they're dead.
when they're martyred. Right?
Yes,
So not
exactly.
just dead, but die
Yes,
violently.
yeah.
And so how many... Maybe it's never happened. Maybe not. I think it's happened a lot. But what if someone that was really a pain in your fucking ass as a Catholic clergyman ended up having to be chopped into 1,000 pieces and thrown into a gutter?
Convenient.
What if you just decided to say he was on your team the whole time?
Yeah, you could easily do something
Right?
like that.
By the way, caveat, not even a caveat, but just a tangent, because I love this and I just taught a couple classes on it. But Saint Sebastian. Do you guys know about Saint Sebastian?
A little bit.
Hilarious story. Very funny. So this motherfucker,
Yes.
he gets tied to a tree and filled with a shit ton of arrows and doesn't die. They pull him off the tree, and they're like, I guess we just can't kill him, which seems like a weird thing to do. And they let him loose. He then starts harassing the people that were shooting arrows at him, and then they beat him to death and throw him in a gutter.
I shouldn't be laughing. Damn.
And so but the way that we remember Saint Sebastian is we remember him as the guy that's tied to a tree full of arrows and not dying. We don't remember him as the guy that got hit a couple times in the face and then got soaked in shit. And so that's a really interesting way of like looking back on the way that these things are all historicized, right?
That's so. The
He's
thing
also used a lot by the gay community.
yeah.
Genuinely, like Yukio Mishima, he apparently busted his first nut to him.
Oh my God.
Sick.
There are a couple like really naughty films about Saint Sebastian, a bunch of dicks flopping around. Like for some reason, this is, or at least was for a period in the 20th century, just fucking horny town for a section.
I have no idea. This is the first I'm
gay
hearing
guys,
of it.
which rules, honestly. And I wish that heterosexuals were less boring. But
Honestly,
Well, I wanted to bring up that, like you guys said about the Protestant religions, they were able to traverse from paganism to these Protestant religions because they're very similar. Nowadays, we're seeing that pushback and the reform of the paganism because it looks so much like Christianity. It's basically the same thing. So we're seeing
it's better.
a recall,
Yeah.
a recall back to the original form, which is interesting because you probably have met a couple modern day witches if you live in the 21st century, whether you knew it or you walked past them. They're very easy to identify. But the thing is, there is
Not
a
always.
resurgence happening, and they're using the same implications from prior to now return to originality.
yeah, I definitely see a lot of reasons for that. One is just the political climate with the rise of feminist ideologies, as well as racial equality and the moving away from the church. And then there's also the aspect of technology, which we had mentioned a little bit earlier. But I think a lot of this knowledge was lost on people and was made unavailable. And people that did know this had to be really quiet about it, or else they would get persecuted, But now we have people coming out on all sorts of social media platforms, making their own websites, sharing this knowledge. And now we see this resurgence happening.
The internet has basically made this a goldmine for all these areas and pockets within the world to practice this sort of craft and
Connect with other people who are
Yeah.
associated
Well, they've made
with
it difficult to consolidate a large amount of people and give them limited knowledge. That's really like one of the biggest things that's happened now is that we have so much available to us that it's very hard to condense people into like this one group of people who believe one thing because it's going to break off and everybody's going to know a lot more things now. So well informed.
I mean, again, a reminder that outside of the colonial setting, which I feel like is aberrant, but extremely interesting and worth considering, obviously, the general rule of thumb for being accused of being a witch means that you are in on the information.
Yeah.
So it's a weird setup where we could view this, everything is a weird like postmodern power dynamic of like knowledge and how it flows and who it belongs to and all of that stuff, but it's really interesting to me that you have to be in on the joke, generally speaking, up until a certain point to be accused of witchcraft. Like, generally speaking, the person that's going to be least commonly called out for being a witch is the person that's a witch.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Actually, here's a kind of fun one. Jesus. But there was a witch trial in Moravia, and this went on for 8 decades, like an entire human lifetime if we're today. So, like, a lot of people lived and died, even if they weren't witches, during this period. But the reason it occurred is because an altar boy saw a little girl hide her communion wafer in her book. And when she was accused of taking it and being a fucking weirdo, she ended up saying the wrong thing. And she said that the reason she took it was because she was made to believe that if she fed it to her friend's cow, in a form of witchcraft, that the cow's milk production would increase. And so that's a really weird blending of witchcraft into just fucking Catholicism. Like, why would God's wafers not do a magical thing for someone? And is that not a belief in God? Like, that's such a bizarre thing. And so that's a really fun example of how all of this stuff really becomes ambiguous in the middle, and why it's possible for you to be both a witch and a person that believes very strongly in all of this stuff. Also, later on in that, it's pretty dreadful. I believe it's that one. If it wasn't, then it's one of these. But there were two children that were used who would stand by the church and note a spectral marking, is what they would call it. Spectral marking is this just like a halo or something that would occur that children could see that would represent.
Yeah,
that
I
this
remember.
person
I
is a
remember hearing
witch.
about this.
Or sometimes because the devil had to borrow your body, again because of free will. Sometimes you would appear in the room as like a ghost or something.
Isn't this what influenced like for it to appear then on like certain paintings? Like it suddenly became a thing to have the bit around their
Well,
head?
that's a lot older.
Or is that
too.
older?
But yeah, that's from like Byzantium.
Oh fuck!
But yeah, there is some like artistic precedent for including this kind of thing as well. But so these children could essentially just point to anyone and say, I see the fucking weird thing.
Yeah.
And so
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
And so two of these kids eventually ended up accusing someone important.
Yeah.
I think it was like the priest. I don't know, someone in the priest's family or something
Someone
like that.
they weren't supposed to.
Yeah. And guess what happened?
They killed the kid. No,
Yep. Both
Oh,
of the kids
for
were
real?
found-
Oh, I was just kidding.
Both
Oh
of the
no!
kids-
Oh no! Oh no!
Both of the kids were found with their throats slit.
Yeah.
No one knows who.
Oh my god.
No one
But-
knows who.
Yeah. So again,
He was like, "That's not the right answer." You're like, "Oh god."
sorry to be cynical about it, but people who started witch trials knew that there are no witches.
Oh yeah, for
You know,
sure.
and
believe
people
that.
that were killing one another for being witches, most of them probably didn't think there were witches either.
Yeah.
You know, some of them I'm sure, because people will believe fucking anything, and it's not just because people were dumb and they got
Yeah.
smarter, but you know, there are people that believe all sorts of stupid fucking things now. I'm sure you can't imagine anything, but yeah.
From the way that you're describing everything, then it makes me think how, because of the way we've described it, it sort of had like similar origin points. So like this is kind of like the bulk of where this idea sort of began, and then it sort of rippled out from there as a part of colonialism, like things that happened with it. So like most of the other areas you can think of in the world where this also happened, where there was witch trials or there was prosecution of the peoples who lived there, it's going to be in places in Africa, places in South America, and places in North America with the indigenous peoples who live there. So then the next step of what would happen then is, because there eventually did stop in Europe and in certain places where it wasn't as prevalent, they then went to places where it was much easier to do it. And so in this case, it would be colonial places that they thought were like, well, all these people are savages, they're all heretics basically, and they continue that in a different place because under the idea that they're like, oh well, they're not letting me practice my religion. And so they went somewhere else and took people with them, which is how the slave trade happened. And they're like, we need to bring people here and show them that we're able to take over, and God told me I can do it. And then you have modern interpretations of like manifest destiny and shit like that.
Yeah. And I think there's a subtler version of that same thing occurring, which is really fascinating. And so on the Benzo Rehab Dungeon, we did an episode on accelerationism.
Yeah.
And one of the big things that I wanted to make extremely clear in that is that when an economic crisis occurs somewhere, or when an economic boom occurs somewhere, which almost always follows a crisis, or is followed by a crisis rather, it doesn't just repair itself and go away. It moves all over the fucking world. It spirals around, it ripples, it just fucking moves until it works itself out. Which maybe it never works itself out, right? And so like the 2008 crash is still occurring somewhere in the world.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think, and this is kind of a wishy-washy theory, but I think the same type of thing occurred with the witch trials, right? Where this type of ripple, and at bottom, it is an economic phenomenon.
Yeah.
Right. And so this ripple occurred somewhere, and it kind of moved and changed into different types of things. And even if in the end, they're not necessarily calling one another witches, even if the terminology changed, still that process of selling out your brother certainly never went away.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Or your sister.
Just found different methods of doing these sort of things that they were doing prior to this in different ways that didn't include this, but could have been something that they were doing in certain politics, like when they had people just murdering each other quietly in different places. They then had like we mentioned earlier, another way they could do these certain things.
Well, yeah.
And so this then feeds into the ideology of certain peoples.
Like, they're not witches anymore, dude. They're communists. Is your neighbor
Yeah.
communist?
Yeah, you had something like that. Yeah, so it's like that's just like, that was just straight fear mongering of like, yes, you have to be afraid of these people because of what they believe in, and then it was easy to do it with a certain amount of media coverage that was only available to certain people, and so you then funneled everything into the TV because the TV had like come out on during a certain time period, and they're like, how do we feed people information that isn't just the radio?
Right. I think it's insightful, especially when we've kind of come upon this idea of, the best witches in accusation are people that feel similarly to you, and yet still somewhat different. I would say that the modern day witches, I mean, you could say it's like gay people or like anyone trying to get into abortion, but like that's kind of like a consistent thing that's been going on for forever, right? But I would say that our current day witches are Muslims, right? Because they think something similarly. They have this weird culture where like if they walk by a pig, they explode, like is what like my fucking uncle thinks that doesn't exist. But no, like but you've talked to these like right wing kind of extreme people that are like, I coat my bullets in bacon.
Oh, gotcha.
Please.
Okay,
Right?
I get what you're saying. Yeah, they have a certain idea of what they think.
They treat them like vampires.
Yes,
right?
There's
Because
an
they're
idea.
witches.
Yeah,
Because Muslims are witches.
in this case,
Muslims are witches.
It's like how we were mentioning earlier, where these people have chosen to only take their information from a certain place, which is what people. Well, at the time, people didn't really have much choice to be like, well, I'm only getting info from this one person. But in this case, they're now narrowing their view to this one thing, and so that creates this. It makes them easier to be able to change their minds about things, and so then you have the like extreme far right version of just like, what are you thinking about other people outside of the United States, and they don't know anything about anybody outside the United States.
I mean, it's like if you ever talk to a QAnon person.
I've not.
Many.
Oh my
I
god.
know a lot of them in
I'm
my
so
family
sorry.
and otherwise. For some reason, a lot of people that are into like weird philosophy and theory are also fucking nuts in different ways than I am. But they're not. It's such a weird phenomenon because they're not just fucking dumbasses. They say some extremely stupid things, but they are hyper literate in one thing that is extraordinarily wrong. Right?
Yes,
Just
exactly.
like with the witchcraft, and just like with like, if you talk to a Catholic priest that doesn't think that fucking like bacteria exists, and you're like, you have to be the dumbest person I've ever talked to in my life, and then they blow your mind with like a 30-minute rant about the fucking Trinity, and it's like, okay, no, you're not dumb. Your brain is just in a different universe.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
So,
definitely.
A different whole worldview with those kind of people.
I feel like that's happened to a lot of people I know, because I knew a lot of people who went to the Catholic high school and preschool, middle school, and all of that, and they would usually have very good life advice when it came to like legitimately being nice to other people, but then they'd be like, yeah, but like gay people don't exist, and then you're like, what? You just gave me all this good info, and then you just say some bullshit like that? Like, what are you talking about?
It's this inherent hypocrisy.
Yeah,
in
which
the
is
faith,
so weird.
for sure, because a lot of these like you're like pagan and like your heathens and whatnot had their own ideas for fostering community, and a lot of them like we've already mentioned line up a lot with these other ideals too. So it's like some of the ideas are good, some are also bad, but they're not really too far off from being very similar to each other.
Agreed.
Me?
I want to hear about some modern day practice.
Modern day practice?
Or just like, like where we're headed towards, like with witchcraft in the 2020s, I guess. Or just like
I mean,
just
it's
the
hard to
uprising of
say.
it.
I think at this point we're coming to a great point of like diversity within the craft, because the resurgence of witchcraft in modern day happened around like the 60s, and that was specifically with Wicca.
Yeah.
I forget his name. It's something like Buckland or Backland or something like that. But he published a book essentially sharing his knowledge he had on witchcraft, which is a lot of it is appropriation, but it's all the people had at the time. But at this point, we're coming to an era where so much information is readily available to everybody that they're sort of rediscovering the way witchcraft has been presented throughout many cultures. And like that's the interesting thing about witchcraft, is that it's not just existing in one certain area. It's across every continent, every religion has some aspect
Right.
of witchcraft involved with it. Whether you call it that or not is
Yeah.
besides the point, but it's still there.
One of the interesting things about witchcraft or Wicca or paganism and those other things is that unlike these other like doctrines and Christianity, Catholicism, etc., they don't necessarily have the one correct way that you do things.
Yeah.
It's very much up to the individual.
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest aspect of any sort of spellcraft or witchcraft is intention. Like the way you do things is sort of like you're given a blueprint depending on what sort of culture you're involved with, whether it's paganism or Wiccanism or Luciferianism, Santeria. Doesn't really matter. There's some sort of blueprint there involved with the culture, but at the same time, the way you do things is completely up to you. And it's whatever really fits with you, right? Because the biggest aspect of witchcraft is manifesting your intentions into reality. And the way you manifest your intentions is through yourself, obviously. So the best way to do it is the way you want to do it,
And that's sort of how it existed prior to a lot of persecution, was people
Yeah.
were doing exactly that. And you have a lot of written down history of people doing that, and then it getting changed into, well, what does it become in this century of, well, I think this person is a witch because of my ideology has suddenly changed. And then now we have a sort of resurgence of it because we're now able to go back and look at these things because we have such huge archives of information that now we're having I think a really good discovery of things that were once thought of as like a good thing, and then something that got subverted and turned into something.
And a lot of the basis of witchcraft is giving power to the individual and power to the people as a whole, which is definitely a big conversation topic amongst everything that we have going on right now, whether it's political, sociological, economical, is bringing power back to the people, which is what witchcraft does. It puts power on the person themselves.
That's probably why governments and other people like that are very scared of it.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I think that's 100% true. I would say that one of the defining factors of witchcraft is that it's necessarily qualitative rather than quantitative, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Whereas, something like, if you think about the fucking Catholic Church, one of the first things you think about is like a certain form of like mathematics, be it either financial fiduciary or like, having to do with exactly how your building is built. Like all of it becomes extremely quantitative. And so witchcraft is actually really well suited for the modern kind of, or postmodern era, the contemporary era, because of the fact that we're more and more atomized and more encouraged to being qualitative while still being forced into these really awful toxic environments that are like algorithmically induced or otherwise that are inherently quantitative, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that witchcraft is actually a really good way to rebel in a very small way, right? I
Absolutely.
mean, it's not opening a soup kitchen, but you could have a witch soup kitchen, like very easily, right?
Yeah.
But one of the big movements. So a lot of the information that I used for this is from Silvia Federici, who is a huge feminist scholar, still alive and fantastic. But in the 1970s, she was part of a feminist movement called Wages for Housework. And Wages for Housework was functionally saying exactly what it sounds like, but it wasn't even necessarily demanding that, right? It was simply trying to bring into the common consideration that the only reason that we're able to have the type of capitalistic economy that we have is because there's someone else doing unpaid labor somewhere else, right?
Absolutely.
Same way that slavery functioned, right? And so
Yeah.
it's just like, well, now we have women who are
redefined.
doing... Right. And it's like, you don't beat your slave... Oh, you do beat your... Fuck! It doesn't work!
Yes, exactly that.
So the transition's very clean. But yeah, so I needed to give her credit, but also, yeah, I mean, this is something that is a political movement and is very much alive. Was, like you said, 60s and 70s, hugely alive in kind of the political scene, but is still very much part of like a lot of anarchist, primarily movements, certainly some communist stuff, but communists tend to be a little bit more quantitative. They care about numbers a lot, which is good. God bless you, communists. But please, just when you finally win, don't put me against the wall like you usually do. They love anarchists. But yeah, so the last thing I wanted to say really was bringing back to this linguistic point. which isn't me shutting down the. That's not up to me. I'm not
So
the boss
now we're
here.
pretty much there.
Cool. I felt like we've been. Going
We're
for a
gonna
while.
have to.
Okay.
We're gonna have to get to a moment where we're gonna cut it, but then we're
Right.
going to eventually talk about where it goes. So
Okay.
other parts of the world that it'll kind of. Like you said, it changes forms
Right.
and then takes on a new meaning in a different place. And
Sure,
so
sure.
these places are going to be then like South America, North America, and then like Africa would probably be the biggest ones. Of
Right.
like where there's certain places where things are going to happen that sort of echo would happen in Europe.
Yep.
And then it's going to be almost with the same people too, because these people left Europe to these places and then did the same thing over and over again.
Right, just like how after World War II, a lot of the Nazis went to certain places.
Yeah, certain
America,
South American countries. Yeah, that's why
or to NASA. You know?
That's
What up,
Oh
NASA?
my god, dude! Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they went and did some projects, made a fucking nuke. Anyway,
Right. But so this is kind of, it starts off as a fun fact, but then I hope it becomes something that I think people will consider in a deeper way. But the Battle of Hastings around 1000 AD. I should know the exact date. I think it's 1036 or something. Maybe that's right. Maybe I shouldn't have shat on myself. But the Battle of Hastings occurs, and we have a blending of languages that then goes on to produce something like English. And the example that people generally give of this when they're teaching a class or giving, their fun facts at a party where everyone hates them because they're talking about English, is that
I'm guessing you've been that dude before.
so many times. The last party I went to, I talked about Hegel. Like, I'm a bad person to be
Oh.
around.
I'm a bad person.
Yeah. This is me right now. This is me at a party.
Oh my gosh.
But when the Battle of Hastings occurred, we had a splitting as well as a combining, because we had people who spoke something kind of like a Proto-French or Latin or Post-Latin, and then people who essentially spoke some version of German. And we blended these things together, and some of these people had money and power and clerical positions, and they were still speaking something more like French. And so and then the people working for them spoke something like German. And so the example that you always see is something like, poultry, French base, it's the birds that you eat. Whereas chicken, comes from, or hens rather, that's closer to the German, Huhn, comes from the German.
Yeah.
Bœuf for beef versus cow, Kuh. Swine versus pork. All of these things occur because there is a delineation where the rich only care about it when it's food, and the people who are serving care about it when it's an animal, because that's part of their labor. But one that no one ever brings up for some reason is the split between grammar and glamour, which you don't think is being connected at fucking all. But they both come around to this concept of spelling, right? So both of them reconnect in this idea of magic later, but grammar becomes rules that you need to live by. Grammar is exactly how you say something. You can't say it any other way. You live in a world full of rules. Glamour becomes, this is how you make things beautiful. Because that's the only real rule you need to live by. There are no other rules. You just need to be aesthetically pleasing to people around you. Right? You need to be glamorous. And they both come back with this concept of spelling, which applies to both of them, where you can be spell binding. You can cast spells and control things in a qualitative way. Or you can spell your fucking words correctly, you prole, because it's in fact your job to cast spells in a specific way. And so both of them come back to a form of magic. And I would say that there are certain fantasies of magic that exist contemporaneously, like the Harry Potter fantasy, which is essentially the hyper-neoliberal fantasy, and I will shit on Harry Potter every time I come on here, but it's the hyper-neoliberal fantasy.
None of us like Harry
that
Potter.
that you get invited
I
into.
like Harry Potter.
You
I
get
just don't like
invited
J.K. Rowling.
into a really nice university, and then you do really well at that university because you yourself are special. And then you beat the Dark Lord, and there's an economy based around this, and everything is ultimately tied to meritocracy and finance.
Yes,
And there are
that's true.
people around that are just shitty, and you'll always be better than them because they're muggles or whatever the fuck slur you want to use.
Muggles.
Versus this other qualitative fantasy about how magic works, where people function in different ways. and people accomplish their daily lives and survive in a way that is necessary for their survival without producing some kind of cruel optimism or some kind of fantasy of an idealized world or idealized self where they have a nice car and all of these things, like the Secret Witchcraft, which is still Witchcraft, right? The Secret, you guys remember that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I totally forgot
So-
about that, but that was a thing for a while.
Right, so that's Harry Potter.
Jesus.
Also, getting your mail delivered by like the slowest bird, and you have magic.
So many. It's
teleportation and shit.
hilarious when they started poking holes and everything, and being like, "Wait, why is it built like this?" Like, and then she keeps giving us more and more information we don't need to know about the universe, and it just makes it weirder and weirder every time. And I'm like, "Oh, okay."
There are no logistics in
Yeah.
Harry Potter.
we've somehow digressed into what we hate about Harry Potter, which is funny to me.
Thank you, Dorian.
because of a word association, I think, at some point. But it's because it changes meaning a lot of the time, I think.
Well, I like that you bring up, like, we have that hyper neoliberal, like, fantasy kind of thing, but also you have the general people who use, like, magic to better their lives or just go about their daily lives. I think that's, like, a thing with the practicing witch. It's just they're going to be doing their dailies. They're going to be doing their rituals when they can. When they want to prosper, they will try to sway or manifest that energy so they can, because they care about themselves. People generally care about themselves, and they want to be better than what they usually are.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, what witchcraft comes down to is the gaining of knowledge, and this knowledge in turn is then used to benefit you throughout your daily life. Like, something I summoned, or I guess tried to manifest, was wealth knowledge in order to get a better job, have better control over my finances, and, like, it's working, it's
Hell
going in
yeah.
a certain direction.
To bring back to Dorian's point about grammar or glamour, that shit's bussin'.
Bussin'. Oh my god.
Yeah.
I never thought I'd hear you use that word.
I've said it before, and this is a humble brag, but I have 2 degrees, of which I got Latin honors for both, at the 2 best English departments in the world.
Snaps all around.
Yeah, so he's not just talking out of his
And
ass.
the reason I did that is to shit on people that care too fucking much about grammar. Because you're wrong. Prescriptive grammar is dumb. Go away.
Grammar's just made up anyways.
Words are made up.
Mouth
Grammar ain't a
noises.
thing.
Mouth noises. That shit bussin'.
Love
damn
mouth
it.
noises.
We should all just grunt at each other all the time.
Man.
Instead,
Jeez, that's
yeah.
not what we do already.
This next half
I mean, that's
hour.
all I hear, so.
So, final thoughts.
Yeah, I'm going to give this piece like a 9. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I give this piece of fiction.
I give it like a 9.5.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Justine on her
Yeah, it
point.
was a
That's
solid
just-
effort.
It's a solid effort. Oh my god.
Well, okay, how about this? How about you tell viewers if they're interested
Viewers?
in... yeah, listeners and viewers.
Who's
Yeah.
viewing us?
They're
Dude.
staring at the ceiling.
I
guess.
set up a secret camera in here. Surprise.
Whoa.
Well, if they want to get started into that kind of realm, or if they want to like start trying to practice that, what would be a good starting point for them?
I would say just know yourself first and foremost, because every path you can go down for any sort of witchcraft or spellcraft is very different. There's definitely different categories, as we talked about earlier, of types of witches. You have seers, you have conjurers, you have medicine workers, you have ancestor workers. So just figure out what appeals to you the best, because the things that appeal to you are the most powerful. They get the most energy out of them.
And then steal your neighbor's dick.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I thought we weren't going to mention it again because we mentioned it once and never went back.
Yeah.
But that's a hilarious story that these dudes were like, they just fucking stole my dick in the middle of the night. And you're like, what are you talking about? Can you imagine
Metaphorically
going
steal
to,
his dick.
can you imagine a full grown man comes to you and tells you that his dick got stolen in the middle of the night? And you're like, what? What?
How
What
are
are
you
you,
still
are you on
breathing?
drugs? Like, what are you talking about?
That's just syphilis.
You know,
Oh, shit.
Guys, he didn't have his blue chew. We are... No, I'm just kidding.
we've gone full circle. Sponsor us, please.
I think Justine's absolutely right
Yes.
on this one when it comes to any of these like Wiccan or pagan beliefs or anything like that, is that you should absolutely find whatever, array of deities or lack thereof.
Yeah.
And then whichever one meshes best with you. Obviously, do not take it to a point of like ethnic superiority.
Yeah.
It's not
Oh, Jesus.
okay for anybody.
Another thing I would recommend is not to subscribe to any one thing. I
Right.
personally find myself working in many pantheons of deities and taking little bits from every religion, just the things that make sense to me. Ultimately, your craft should be very personal to you. Just because you choose to identify as a pagan or whatever you want to follow doesn't mean you have to completely subscribe to every ideology and every method and practice that they do. Do what feels right to you, because that's where the strongest magic comes from.
It's also no surprise that we are having a resurgence of these ideologies in a time here in the United States where we're basically living in a capitalist nightmare. And it's like basically echoing of what might have happened elsewhere. And so we then have what we talked about earlier, where it's just reemerging in different forms and then taking on new meaning for a lot of people. So at this point now, yes, it ends up making sense that people are having a rediscovery of certain ideals and knowledge that's been kind of progressing us in a certain direction.
I would say, as someone that doesn't commit himself to witchcraft, but is intrigued by a lot of the kind of surrounding information and kind of various forms of, kind of lifestyle modification, would be that the best things in witchcraft that I myself have seen and understand that fit in with my own kind of worldview are simply that we need to, in this space where we're so obsessed with everything being quantified, everything being controlled by algorithms, everything having to make absolute sense, and us all needing to have some kind of exemplative and extraordinary lives, that the most important things to do for your own life to feel a little bit happier, or to rebel, or to just consider the qualitative, the subjective experiences of your own life and the way that everyone's lives are different, and to appreciate the ordinary, which I think are both two things that are huge in, witching or whatnot. I just got tired of the word witchcraft. But, grow a fucking time plant. That seems like witchcraft to me, and that fucking
Chaos
rules,
magic.
Yeah, just do it. Have some basil, have a little garden, cook some food, feed it to your neighbor, Witchcraft.
I also
Yeah.
cannot get over the idea of someone just kind of casually gardening, and then someone comes over and they're like, "What is that? What are you growing?" And they're like, "What?
Beans?
It's an herb." Well,
It's
what kind of herb is
nightshade.
it? And they're like, they're trying to explain to them that it's just like for some cooking. And they're like, "Witch," and then like the whole thing happens right from that point, and you're like,
it's
"Oh
good
god."
for your blood pressure. You can control blood.
Yeah, exactly. And then
Ah.
it turns into something awful like that. I'm just like, God, it's like it ends up being comical and then really dark. You're just like, oh no, the people are really doing this off of something
Well,
that simple.
to hark back what Dorian said about having just basically like we're in a time in our lives where algorithms are prevalent. Everything has to have an answer. We need the answer at the touch of a button. I think it's good for people to somewhat return to monkey and just like sit and ponder
Monkey.
and just not have an answer and just think about things.
Yeah, that's a big thing when you're going into the craft, is sometimes you won't have an answer for something, and sometimes things just don't make sense, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes things really have no meaning. You don't have to find meaning in everything.
Just sit outside and just think with yourself for a
Yeah.
while. Yeah.
Honestly,
Yeah, especially after being inside this
if
whole
y'all
time.
haven't touched grass in a while, you really should.
Yeah, go to the park.
If
That's
you're
some good
yeah,
shit.
if you're listening right now, go to a park. Take your shoes off
Yes.
and your socks and just feel that fucking grass.
Fuck yeah.
That shit's wholesome and it's bussin'.
I was about to say it's fucking bussin'.
Just go to your nearest park and just start free bleeding everywhere.
Yeah, I was gonna say, get
all over the
naked, start a
place.
fire, start dancing around the tree. You'll be fine.
Hey, it's really fun and like stress relieving. You should try it.
I
sometime.
imagine it is. I'm just snail trailing my apartment all the time. I don't even live in an apartment.
Oh
but
my god!
Uh,
that's a pre-cum joke.
whoa.
I was wondering if anyone else got it. I was like, oh
I don't
god.
have a dick, so like I can't relate. I don't know these secret men jokes.
Fuck.
All right, then we've come to the end of this episode at least, but we're going to keep talking about it because there's so much stuff to talk about. And this is like the smallest bit of whatever has happened in history.
Possibly part 2, maybe in the possible future.
Yes, I would say so.
Because y'all, we never got out of Europe. I'm just saying.
Yeah,
true.
that's why we got to have multiple parts, because you can't just do everything in one go.
Agreed. I would say we did plan on doing 2 or 3 of these. I mean, not at first, but then, we've been moving around a lot. So doing a second one would be good. I'd be happy for you to bring me on. Also, it's always a pleasure to come on here.
Yes.
It's really, really fun.
Yay.
And if I were to kind of summarize the last 3 episodes as a lesson for people, I would say that everyone is constantly informed by their past experiences, and you need to consider that everyone's experiences are different from yours, and
Yes.
that the only way to fight Roko's basilisk and the simulation we are stuck in is to appreciate the ordinary day and become a warlock.
Yes.
It is everyone's divine right to be a fucking warlock. I'm just saying.
Nice.
I'm just saying.
The best thing that you can do, and or one of the best things you can do, is also just respect your little community that you have around you, your friends and whatnot. Make sure that they're doing okay, and do these. And if you're going to engage in these, I don't know, like spellcraft and whatnot, your intention, like Justine was saying, is incredibly important, and that. I guess positivity, or at least that willingness to help others, is very, very important.
And if you're not helping others, make sure it's for a good reason.
True.
Yeah.
Very true.
Everything comes back to you.
It
3
really
times.
does.
Yeah. Even bad things, but if your intention is there, if it's for some sort of benefit, you're going to receive that benefit back. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't hex somebody, because you should absolutely hex the motherfucker. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
He deserved it. He fucking deserved it.
It's just so important to have boundaries.
Oh my God. All right. We're walking out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Wait, let me get my shoes.
Yes.
Gotta get my coat.
Every gather up.
I'll walk you guys out.
Yes,
Come
go
on.
Yeah.
for
Give me a
it.
sec.
So if I may give some final pitches for
Oh, shit.
things I have occurring, check out, again, the Benzo Rehab Dungeon. You can find that on Instagram, as well as everywhere your favorite podcasts are played. I almost said sold.
Streamed?
Streamed. Also, I have a meme page that is entirely incomprehensible to even people that do study theory. That is Dank Deloz.
Fucking love that page.
So outrageous. I love those things.
And that's also on Instagram and Facebook. But, I don't really post on Facebook, so leave it alone, let it die.
This is
Yeah,
Facebook.
Facebook
I
is
know, it's a
dying.
graveyard.
Says the one who still sends me
I've
things
been
on
recently
Facebook.
told by many people that I'm old and that Facebook is dead, and
true.
it's
Yeah.
more proof that I'm hitting 30 and over. And I'm just like, oh, I'm in a different age bracket.
If
like
you use Facebook, you don't think COVID's real.
Oh.
Yes. Yeah.
And my last, I just have so much stuff going on. But the last couple things would be that I do run a theory and writing workshop that happens every week on Saturdays, 11 a.m. until 2 p.m. PST. You can find us either through that Instagram page or on Patreon. It's patreon.com/TRUNCATA, Trincata. It's beautiful community that we've built up. Also, if you can't afford it, then just reach out to me and I will let you in for free. I do not care. And the final thing, we have an open workshop this week, but that's not, never mind. This won't be out by then because it's tomorrow. And the last thing, if it is out before August 14th and 15th, Foreign Object with a K, who has had some incredible theorists on and hosted me once before, is putting on a memes and philosophy workshop titled How to Make Yourself a Wojak Without Organs. That's going to be 3 of us. Some of my favorite internet people are going to be on there. We're going to teach you how to make memes. We're going to teach you some deluz, and we're not going to dumb it down. So that'll be great. Again, 14th and 15th of August. And thank you so much for having me on and listening to all of that shit.
Thank you, Dorian.
Thank
grab
you.
your coat. It's a little chilly outside. We're going to be walking out right quick. Thank you for listening to this episode of Bringing Down the Grindhouse, a podcast where we discuss horror in media. You could check us out on all the streaming services wherever podcasts are played. We would also appreciate it if you check out our Patreon, where for $2 a month, you could subscribe and give us movies to recommend, as well as other pieces of horror media. Also, check out our merch, where we have our t-shirts and hats that is on our Teespring. There's a link in the Instagram bio.
And there's a new T-shirt design coming
New
soon.
fucking T-shirts,
Yes.
boys.
Pretty awesome.
It's the first piece of merchandise that has Justine on it as
Yeah.
well. Because our old
Yeah.
one did not
I'm
have the
finally
newest
a part of
member.
the podcast.
It's so
I want a T-shirt.
It's so
now.
fucking cute,
We
and I
need a
don't
new
want to
design.
spoil it.
Yes,
Yeah, don't
yes.
spoil it.
I'm not gonna spoil that shit, but it's fucking adorable.
Uh,
So check it out.
yeah. Also, we'd like to thank our current patrons. We got Sean.
Yep.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah, Sean. We also got Raymond,
Yeah.
Eric.
Eric, and then we also have this CK of horror.
Cult of Knowledge Cinema.
Cult of Knowledge Cinema. Also, yeah,
Yeah.
that's super cool. I have no idea who that is, but thank you so much for doing that. It's awesome.
We're gonna
Yeah.
try to get more content on there, and we appreciate your help as always. So yeah. Also, Blue Chew, please fucking
Our dicks are so soft.
Yeah, I want a boner
We
pill
need
to
you.
sponsor us.
No,
like
they're not
real
boner
shit.
pills. They're boner chewables, John.
My
Yes.
dick does just fine, all right?
They have female
That's what I heard.
versions.
I don't need a female. I literally just said my dick.
Oh. Oh.
Whoa!
Walk us
Whoa!
out. Walk us out, bitch. Walk us out.
We gotta go.
We gotta go. Things are getting hairy. All right, so
Hairy.
I'm Mitch.
I'm Murr.
I'm Justine.
I'm Jonathan.
And I've been Dorian or Danko Suvin. And reminder, vasodilation works on men and women.
Thank you.
Woo!